Welcome to episode 173 of the Do It Right podcast with Valerie Sokolosky. A phenomenal human being. I put myself in the group of one of your favorite fans. I've had the opportunity to be with you in multiple settings. Here,
right?
Whiskey tastings, other things that we have done together. But you asked me a question a few minutes ago, which has led us to me introducing you. Mm-hmm. And that is, who are you? And I want to take a stab at answering, who is Valerie Sokolosky? Because I've listened to this series of the Do It Right podcast, and I encourage everybody to do that. Because what you're going to find is not only the guests that you have and the insight that they give all of us that are in positions of responsibility leading others, we find out a lot about you by the questions that you ask, and by the guests that you choose to have. And what I've come to understand is that you are what we would say in Hebrew, a mensch, a really great person. And you have a talent of bringing guests who have insight into the biggest challenges that organizations are facing today, and to allow them to bring out different techniques that if somebody listens to all of the series, they're going to find ways to meld these things together, maybe not from one guest, but from multiple guests. So who is Valerie? One of the best connectors that I know. And with that, welcome to episode 173.
Welcome to our podcast, Doing It Right. This podcast reveals authentic stories from successful leaders doing it right. It's about their journey to become a leader, their choices, motivations, and lessons. In essence, how they built successful personal brands. Your host is Valerie Sokolosky, author of 8 leadership books and nationally known as an authority on executive presence and personal branding. Let's get started. Here's Valerie.
Can you just stay around a while? Steve SOSLAND is my guest. I love you back. I love you back. Steve SOSLAND today is my guest, and I have obviously known Steve for a while. It started way back when. He's always been my boss. Let's just start there. Years ago, when I was given the opportunity, because I met him, to do executive coaching at then, where were you then?
At the University of North Texas Health Science Center. And as I recall, we were at an International Coaching Federation event on a panel together when we first met.
That's right. And then you moved on from there to now tell them what you're doing.
So I went from there to one university, the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center in Lubbock, Texas. And then from there now at the Texas Tech University system, where we have 5 universities, and I have the privilege of supporting 63,000 plus students and 21,000 faculty and staff.
Is that amazing? I mean, let's just start there. And the interesting thing that Steve said to me years ago was, he said, I'm known as the disruptor. What does that mean, Steve?
Well, it is a thing, positive disruption. Organizations hire me or ask me to consult with them when they're not happy with the way they have defined their current culture. It may be that at one time the culture was relevant and it was good and they need renovation. And from time to time, they've got a toxic culture that they need to transform. And that's where my work begins, is helping people understand that most people are just basically really good human beings. They just need to be in the right environment. You and I have talked about the importance of the soil, and that leaders need to prepare the soil so that people can grow. My work is in disrupting what's here, the status quo, and helping people get to the future that they want.
And it's fascinating work. I don't want to neglect 2 organizations that are also fascinating for just a moment, and they happen to be sponsors of this show today. So I want to thank, first of all, do you love this green?
Absolutely.
It's a bright green.
And I loved it more when I was at UNT.
Yes, you did. This is from Betty Ryder Boutique at Preston and Northwest Highway, Preston Center in Dallas, Texas, and they really have some very unique designer clothes and accessories and so forth. And so the reason I hold it up is because in front of her boutique in the shopping center is a big red door, so you know that you're there. And then I also want to thank Taylor Bags, which is just a beautifully handmade from a very small manufacturing company in Spain. Leathers, you were feeling this right before the show.
I'll tell you, the feel of the leather, but the stitching is incredible.
You noticed that?
Oh gosh, this is So as soon as the show's over, I'm going to do some shopping.
So I want to thank you. That'll make her very happy. Stephanie Taylor, TaylorBags.com. The other thing I like particularly about this one, Steve, is the handle has kind of a twist to it, which is cool. And most of her bags have then a strap that you can use as a crossbody. So thank you, Stephanie Taylor, TaylorBags.com, and Betty Ryder Boutique. Let's get back to us. So you are a disruptor. I want you to share with us what you're currently doing. Years ago, you started this little thing called interviewing a lot of people, asking them, what are your core values? And it has grown globally. This is global. This man now is dealing with, I could mention Jim Collins and all kinds of famous people because he's become famous because of the work you're doing that is infamous.
I might argue this. I'm behind the scenes.
You're humble.
I can't answer that and be humble. So.
I'm going to tell you that.
If we take a look at, let me juxtapose some of the early work that's led to what I think is really important today. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So at one time, and perhaps when we first met, I was talking to a lot of people about the Peter Principle. In 1969, a faculty member named Lawrence Peter wrote a book, not that great of a book, I don't recommend it, but the lessons from it were phenomenal. And most people, even if they've never read the book, they know what the Peter Principle is. And so it's the tendency of organizations that are hierarchical, large organizations, and certainly university systems like I'm in now, but it's the tendency of hierarchical organizations to promote people to their highest level of incompetence.
Oh.
I first noticed this when I was a hospital administrator, and we had frontline nurses that were phenomenal. And then when it was time to look for a supervisor, we would go to the highest performing nurse and say, we want more like you, so would you take the supervisory role? In universities, we do that when we look for department chairs. So we'll take our highest performers and we promote them, and they do pretty well. First of all, they're leading their peers who really like them, that want them to lead them, and that works out well. And then another opening comes up at a higher level, and we promote them to that, and then it goes on until they get to a position where that they're not prepared for. They're not prepared for the people challenges that they're going to have at that level. And then what do we do?
And you said something, if I can just interrupt a second, so interesting. You said at the people level, because I remember, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is relevant.
This is conversation.
Yeah, it is. It is. On air. And we're not taking anything out, by the way. Years ago, Steve, we put on our tagline, we focus on people skills. And this was over 25 years ago. And I've told this story on air before. The man that I was sharing some work with at the time, partnering, said, you shouldn't be doing that because there's not one company that will pay for helping people with people skills. They ought to just know it. Now I'll shut up and let you talk about that.
Well, yes. I would have loved to have had a debate with that person. Because that question of are leaders made or born is kind of a moot point. I think it's just not even a good question, because it really doesn't matter how, even if it were true that leaders are born, if they're not doing anything to sharpen the sword, as Stephen R. Covey would have said, then they're going to become irrelevant very quickly. a great leader has certain characteristics, and one of them is that they're constantly learning. They're becoming more curious. As they get more senior, they ask better questions. They don't have to have the answers, which gets to what you said. I've worked in 5 industries. The first was the U.S. Army.
Yes, West Point. Let's make it clear.
Okay. I've worked in other industries. I had a 20-year business career, and in 2 industries, in the restaurant industry,
Right.
and for 13 years as a corporate recruiter working for Fortune 100 companies, where I learned a lot about the best leaders in corporate America. Then in hospital administration, and now in higher education. It's interesting to me that I don't think that there's much of a difference between what makes a good leader in one industry versus another industry. And something that's common, and this goes back to what you talked about, is that we all begin with some version of a technical skill that we need. We get hired, whether we get hired out of high school, out of college, don't finish high school, technical trade. We've got something technical that we've got to be able to do and figure out how to do, and we need to do that well. And then at the moment we're asked to take a role where we now have responsibility to lead others, our careers change.
Absolutely.
And if we don't recognize that we have a change in a career, then what happens, and what I observe is, ask people in the professions where they're going for their continuing ed. They're going to sharpen their technical skills.
Usually.
But how much effort are they really putting into the people skills? So go back to the Peter Principle. And when we finally fire somebody because they can't meet the challenges, they're usually people challenges, not technical.
Yes. Thank you. Say that again.
They're usually people challenges. It's not the technical. They didn't lose their ability in this case of the nurse. She didn't lose her ability to be a good nurse. She's still probably the best nurse in the hospital. But we were putting her in positions that we did not prepare her for, and the organization's culpable.
So what's the answer? What's the solution?
I believe we have to have active development of our people. We have to, and to do that, I don't believe it means sending people out to leader programs.
And they do. They get sent out to, you're going to school and school.
And now you've got this certification.
Right. I actually had one of them bring the whole big, thick workbook back and say, let me show you what I learned.
Sure. And then how, and I'm sure that person learned a lot. And they're fired up. But how many willing listeners are they when they get back? Who's saying, yes, show me that. Right. Let's go through this. I want to know what you learned. I believe in organic programs, and I believe that what we need to do in organizations is prepare our leaders for the next role before they get it.
Succession.
And succession planning. And that's what I'm on now. More than the Peter Principle. At this stage, with all my gray hair, 2 years left to go working for a large organization, I'm focused on succession planning. I've hired my successor. He'd be a great guest for you, better than me. And I believe that every leader should be asking this question. Or we should ask every leader in our organization. How many people on your team are in the right seat on the bus, Jim Collins? And how many of those are prepared to take on more responsibility now? How many will be prepared a year from now?
Good question.
There's a Society of Human Resources Managers, or management. And they have developed something that a lot of organizations are familiar with. Have you ever heard of a PIP?
No.
Performance Improvement Plan.
Oh, PIP. Yes.
PIP.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
So if I were to get my team together and say, hey, listen, I'd like to meet with you at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and we're going to go over your PIP, your Performance Improvement Plan. Valerie, is that good news or bad news to that person? Are they excited about it?
No, never.
Why?
Well,
why are they not excited about it?
Because it's in a perception, number one.
Perception that
there's always going to be some negatives, and it's what I'm told is, oh gosh, I've got to go through this performance appraisal. And they say
Sure.
it that way.
Exactly. So, And the annual performance appraisal, that's another one of those things I want to disrupt. And I get that from a guy named Marcus Buckingham, and he has a great book, The 9 Lies About Work. But I want to talk about this PIP, if you're okay with it. Okay. So here's the thing. My boss says, I'm tired of Steve. He's not the right fit. So my boss goes to HR and says, I got to get Steve off our bus. I'm going to terminate Steve. So here's what's going to happen in many large organizations. Human Resources is going to say, well, Valerie, you want to get rid of Steve, let's look at his annual performance reviews. And so it's either going to be on a 5 scale or a 7 scale or a 3 scale, or it's meets or exceeds or expectations or doesn't meet. It's going to be some scale, right?
That's right.
And what's going to happen is they're going to look at my performance appraisals that you did, and they're going to say, well, you've got Steve rated right in the middle. You can't get rid of him. You haven't given him fair warning that he's underperforming. So here's what we can do. Let's set up a 90-day performance improvement plan. A PIP.
My audience is dying, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then let's set some goals in there, and when Steve doesn't meet those goals, then you can fire him. This is the worst kept secret in corporate America and other organizations. But that's what happens. So think about what we're saying. What we're saying is that anybody in the organization that has a plan to improve their performance is in trouble.
Exactly.
What's wrong with that?
And that affects coaching, because people think if you're being given a coach, it's a bad thing.
Yeah. And as you and I know, as professional and executive coaches, we don't want to coach people in trouble. We want to coach people who are up and coming, that have barriers in their way of being even better. And for the people who are in trouble, we need to coach their leaders on how to hold people accountable.
So go there for a minute on accountability, because one of the things, I want to hold this up for the people who can see it and those who can't, it's called values-based culture. And you put this booklet together, Steve, because of the work you do with figuring out the culture of an organization. I thought the process was fascinating. Tell the audience what that looks like and what you've found.
Sure. So it says values-based culture, and the guide is really how to lead and live in a values-based culture. So will you open that up to pages 8 and 9 and show that to the camera, and I'll walk through what it is. I think I've got the right page.
I don't have
that
my
goes back
glasses
to
on.
2018, so yeah, that one.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just use this as an example. This
And
is
for those
one.
who can't see, tell them what it
I'll
says.
tell them what it is. And you don't have to be able to see it. In fact, if you'll just get on Valerie's website after this, in the show notes, we're going to put a link where you can get this. How's that?
That's
I just made that up. Are
wonderful.
you okay with that?
I love it. I love giveaways. Don't you love giveaways? Thank you. Thank
Sure,
you ahead
you
of
bet.
time.
We'll have a digital version that
Okay.
we'll make available to the audience. Okay, on those 2 pages, what's listed there are the values of one of our universities. It's Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. In May of 2018, we gathered 104 people together at a remote site in an off-site meeting. The 104 represented 5,000 faculty and staff plus 3,000 students. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to identify what are the core values shared by everybody in the organization.
And how did you do that?
Yeah, so the assumption here is that everybody has values. So let's simplify this. What are values?
Right. And what are core values?
Yeah. So how about if we call them deeply held beliefs,
Yep.
perhaps guiding principles, things that I won't compromise? So instead of doing what's common, and that is in one of these ivory towers, you know, if a small group of people get around a table like this and say, oh, these are good values, let's tell everybody to go live those.
And then they're on the wall, and everyone who comes in goes on onboarding. Those are our values.
Yeah, and we can show it to stockholders,
Right.
we can show it to employees, we can do this, and we point to the wall,
That's right.
right? Or to our website. We tried to do this a little differently. What we said is values don't come from a company. In fact, when we hire somebody, we get them with their values. So where do values come from for an individual? Well, when I ask that question, I ask people, okay, think about when I ask people these questions. I'll say, where were you born and where were you raised? Different questions.
Yes.
For some people, it's the same place, but for some, they'll give me, everybody has one place where they were born, but they have multiple places where they were raised. So we get a sense of the diversity of a group of employees. In our case, in universities, we may have 140 countries.
Exactly.
Right? Different religions, ethnicities, colors of their skin, sexual preferences, every way you can think of diversity. So we ask people those kinds of questions. Where were you born? Where were you raised? How many siblings do you have? Where are you in the lineup? And we actually have them keep their cell phones on, and they're answering these questions, and it's going up on a screen, and we get a chance to see it all in a word cloud.
It's just cool.
Yeah.
It's just cool, yes.
Then I ask, okay, when you were in your formative years, you either grew up in a nurturing environment or you may have grown up like me in a hard environment, but somebody was influencing you and helping to shape who you would become. Who was it? So let me ask you, who were the people in your life that were influencing you when you were a young girl?
Well, good news, bad news. I didn't have parents. I did, but they were finishing their 4th divorce. So gratefully, I was raised by a wonderful grandmother.
Maternal or paternal?
Maternal.
Yeah.
Maternal grandmother.
And for me, my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandfather were my strongest influencers. Who else?
Interesting.
Who else influenced you? And by the way, your parents, how did they influence you in terms of things that would be important to you? Because you and Doug have been married for a long time.
Yes. I think from my mother, who obviously had to make a living for me in the retail business. She was a retail buyer, sportswear buyer. I think that's why image is part of what I do in companies, professional image. And so she taught me the kind of the charm school things, which later is funny, Steve, because I then owned and ran a charm school.
Yeah.
In fact, people still will call a company manager might call and say, you do those charm school things, don't you? Don't you have kind of those, well, it's called business etiquette now, or professional presence. It's really how you look, act, walk, talk, and are. So to answer your question, other than my grandmother, my mother was influential, I suppose, in just the drive to make things work. Because again, she was divorced 4 times, and she had to make it work, and she had this little girl called Valerie. She had to then raise after my grandmother died.
So think about this. Drive, persistence, attention to detail. You've already mentioned those, maybe not just with all the words you use drive, but the persistence is there. Obviously, the attention to detail is there. The deep care and concern for people, others focused. That's what we do. We get everybody back in that time of when they were young growing up. And now all of the shouldas and couldas and wouldas get wiped away for a moment with a group of people. They're sitting around round tables. They're sharing these stories with the people at their table. And then we move a flip chart to the table and we say, will you write down what your table group has in common with each other? So they've thought about themselves individually. Now they're starting to see, oh, yes, yeah, that too for me. And we ask them, only write down what all of you agree on that was part of your value set. And they do.
And what do you mean all of that they agree on?
So most common, people will have something that they will define somewhere around the word integrity.
I was just going to say
It
integrity.
is the
always
single
comes
most
up.
common. So they'll talk about honesty and trustworthy and doing the right thing, and do the right thing even when it's hard, or do the right thing even when no one is looking. That's most common. Second is something to do with compassion, respect, kind-hearted, and we'll hear those. And then for many people, it's something about team, collaboration, being together with others. We'll have that. So let's kind of wrap this one up, okay? And that is that we can do that, then we can do it for the entire room. We're going to do it with the city in April. First time. I'm going to experiment.
That's
Maybe
incredible.
my biggest professional failure coming up in 2 months.
Oh, no, you won't fail.
But we're going to try to do it across the city. Can we identify, in this case, Wichita Falls, Texas, where we have Midwestern State University, can we actually get people from all different backgrounds, even different politics, to agree on common core values that they hold deeply, and then define it so that we can then identify the specific behaviors that are desired among a group. This is the way we will behave. This is the way we will treat each other. And when a company can do that, then we can write a guide like this to say, now that we have these values and behaviors identified, what do we do with that? And how do we live that way so that we keep this culture alive for years to come and make it sustainable? And sustainability is the toughest challenge.
You know, you just netted it out much better than I could have. I've seen the process, and here's what I've seen as an outcome, which is what's important. It's one thing to say, okay, you've got this program, you've got this process, you've got whatever it is, but what's the so what? Well, I can say to the audience, because I've experienced it, the so what is it's sustainable. You use that word. Those pieces of the process that you take everybody through has to be sustainable because they work there. And you have opened up their very being as to what's really important to them. And I think that's the ultimate, Steve, that your work is now global, first of all. I just think that's awesome. You are going all over the world, and you mentioned the W what? Where you're what were the initials of of where you're going?
Wichita Falls for the...
No, the
sorry.
world.
Oh, sure. The World Business Forum in New York.
Okay.
This coming October 23rd and 24th.
Okay.
Considered to be one of the top leader development for C-suite executives programs in the world. And we're going to the one in New York, and Texas Tech University System will be a sponsor this year.
That's, I think, the proof of the pudding, folks. And you can see on the banner how to get in touch with Steve SOSLAND, because while his day job is at Texas Tech, right, you're doing this on behalf of Texas Tech all over the world.
Well, let's make the field guide available for anybody who would like that.
You're going to give something away. I love it.
Let's, in addition to that, I want to, if you'll put my contact information, people can contact me, and I'm going to give you my cell phone number that you can publish.
All right. So
I would ask people to text me.
Great.
Okay. If they're interested in getting some help, we'll give them advice on how they can do this themselves in their own organizations, because we envision a world, a better world, if we can disrupt more organizations positively, breaking the status quo. Let's do what we can to have people live a positive, values-based culture.
You know, Steve, that's what's called a visionary. You are a visionary. And it's not often that I can look out when someone says, well, who do you know that's a visionary? I'm not sure I'd really have an answer except for you, because you have taken an idea, you've put a process together to come up with an outcome, and now you're doing this all over the world. Steve, I'm so humbled that you're still my friend, and he's still as humble as he's ever been. And if he does fall off of the pedestal at all, which he wouldn't, I would kick him in the you-know-what. In all honesty, I'm just so grateful that you came back on the show. You were on the show several years ago. This is now 6 years into the show. You're back, and that just shows the catapulting of when you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, for the right people, it happens. And for those of you that are still in the corridor, I just want to tell you something. Don't give up. You're in the corridor. So what? He didn't just do this overnight, but he did it. And that's called doing it right. And that's my story. And I've even got a Valerieism for it. Are you ready for this?
I am.
I always leave Steve with this little thing I come up with, which is just something philosophically. You kind of mentioned it, but for today it is this: I cannot do it alone, and that's okay. That just came to me honestly this morning before the show, because I've done 172 Valerieisms. Let's see, what would it be today? And I always get one, and that's what it is. I'm going to say it again. I cannot do it alone, and that's okay. Steve, you have no problem reaching out to people, and I had a lot of problem doing that. So for my audience who still has problems reaching out and saying, help, I need, could you advise, what would you say to them?
It's a learned skill.
Good.
And if you're curious, and stay curious and learn how to ask better questions of people that you're around, the answers will appear.
Ah, that's beautiful. Thank you, audience, so much for today. I want you to reach out. You know, who wouldn't want this book of cultures? It's amazing. And organizations, you leaders out there who think it might be a very interesting thing to have Steve come in and do this whole assessment, kind of based on real people, the people that work for you. What is your culture? Do you even know it? Well, it'll get tightened down and buttoned up if you go through this process. So I'm grateful, Steve, again, to have you on the show, and I'm more than grateful that you're still my friend. Thank you again.
I love you, and I love spending time with you. Thanks for the
you.
opportunity.
You're so welcome. And until next time, get friends like this. It just feels really good. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. To receive Valerie's voice, free monthly leadership tips, and to learn more about her leadership programs and coaching, visit her website, valerieandcompany.com. Next week, we'll be here again to inspire, engage, and equip you with teachable points of view from successful leaders who have been doing it right. Until then, lead authentically.